In the small, sun-drenched village where Elena grew up, life unfolded like a vibrant tapestry, woven with threads of laughter, friendship, and family ties that seemed unbreakable. Born into a bustling household, she was the youngest of 5, her days filled with the chatter of siblings, the aroma of her mother's bread baking in the clay oven, and the endless games played with friends along the dusty paths winding through olive groves. In those youthful years, Elena's world was a constellation of relationships. Her best friend Maria, with whom she'd climb trees and whisper secrets under the stars, her older brother Tomas, always ready with a teasing grin or a steady hand to help her up, and her parents, whose voices were the heartbeat of home, offering comfort through every scraped knee or fleeting sorrow. Friends from school gathered in noisy clusters, their voices rising in song or argument, while neighbors dropped by with baskets of figs or stories from the day. It was a life rich with connection, where every moment pulsed with the warmth of others. And Elena felt invincible, buoyed by the certainty that this web of love and support would hold her forever. She'd lie awake at night, listening to the crickets and imagining a future where these faces remained constant, their presence an eternal shield against the world's uncertainties. But time, as it does, began to unravel that tapestry, thread by subtle thread. As Elena crossed into her 20s, the village started to feel smaller, its edges fraying with the pull of change. Maria married a merchant and moved to a distant city, her letters arriving less often until they stopped altogether. Tomas left to work in the mines up north, his visits rare and his once easy grin shadowed by exhaustion. Friends from those golden school days scattered, some to cities for jobs, others to start families of their own, leaving behind echoes of laughter that faded into silence. Even her parents, though still near, grew quieter, their hands slower, their eyes fixed more on the past than the future. Elena herself felt the tug of life's rhythm pulling her outward. She took a job as a seamstress in a nearby town, her days now stitched with the hum of a sewing machine rather than the chatter of companions. At first, the shifts were subtle, a gradual thinning of the crowd around her, but as years turned to decades, she began to see the truth. No one, not even those she'd loved most fiercely, could stay by her side forever. Life's currents were too strong, too relentless, carrying each person to their own shore. It was in her 30s, amid this quiet unraveling, that Elena first glimpsed the power of self-confidence, not as a fleeting burst of pride, but as a deep, steady foundation she'd need to build within herself. She'd always been capable, threading needles with precision and mending torn dresses into works of art, but she'd leaned on others for courage, for reassurance, for the sense that she wasn't alone in her choices. Now, with fewer voices to guide her, she faced moments that demanded she stand alone. One winter, when a storm flooded the shop and ruined a week's worth of orders, her employer raged, threatening to fire her unless she fixed it herself. The old Elena might have crumbled, rushing to Tomas or her father for help, but instead, she stayed late into the night, her lantern flickering as she salvaged what she could, her hands steady despite the ache in her back. When the work was done, the orders delivered, and her job secured, she felt a quiet triumph, not just in the task, but in the realization that she could rely on herself. It was a small victory, but it planted a seed, one that would grow as the years pressed on. That seed took root in earnest when Elena moved to a coastal city at 40, seeking better wages and a fresh start. The city was a sprawl of noise and motion, its streets alive with strangers who didn't know her name or her story. She rented a tiny room above a bakery, the scent of bread a faint echo of home, and threw herself into her craft, building a reputation as a seamstress whose stitches were as strong as they were beautiful. Friends were harder to come by here. People moved too fast, their lives too full to linger. But Elena found solace in her own company. She'd walk the cliffs at dusk, the sea crashing below, and feel a strange peace in the solitude, as if the wind itself whispered that she was enough. There were still nights when loneliness gnawed at her, when she longed for Maria's giggle or her mother's gentle hum, but she began to see those pangs as fleeting, not fatal. Self-reliance, she learned, wasn't about shutting out the world. It was about knowing she could face it, even when the world turned its back. She bought a small house with her savings, painted its walls a soft yellow, and filled it with plants she tended herself, proof that she could nurture something, even without others to share it. The years rolled on, and Elena's hair turned silver, her hands slower but no less skilled. She'd long since stopped counting the friends who'd faded away, the letters that never came, the voices that grew faint in her memory. But one story from her later years crystallized the strength she'd built. At 65, living alone in that yellow house, she faced a trial that tested her to her core. A fierce summer drought parched the city, and the well she relied on for water ran dry. The nearest river was a mile away, its banks steep and treacherous, and neighbors grumbled about the heat, waiting for relief that didn't come. Elena, though, refused to wait. Each morning, she'd rise before dawn, tie a scarf around her head, and trudge to the river with a bucket, her steps deliberate despite the creak in her knees. The first day, a young fisherman saw her struggling up the path and offered to carry it for her. She paused, her breath ragged, then smiled and said, "Thank you, but I carry this not just for water, but to keep my strength." He frowned, puzzled, but she kept going, day after day, her arms aching but her resolve unshaken. By summer's end, the rains returned, and her well refilled, but Elena had gained more than water. She'd proven to herself that she could endure, that her spirit was a wellspring deeper than any drought could touch. Neighbors began to call her the River Woman, a nickname she wore with quiet pride, a testament to the self-confidence that had become her truest companion as old age crept closer. Yet, as vital as that inner strength was, Elena's life wasn't lived in isolation. At 42, she'd met Matteo, a carpenter with a crooked smile and hands roughened by years of shaping wood. He'd come to her shop to repair a broken table, and their first conversation, about the grain of oak and the thread of linen, stretched into hours. Then days, then a courtship that felt as natural as breathing. They married a year later under a sky streaked with pink, vowing to build a life together, not just of furniture and fabric, but of trust and tenderness. Matteo was different from the fleeting friends of her youth. He didn't drift away with the tides of ambition or distance. He stayed, his presence a steady rhythm in her days, his laughter a counterpoint to her quiet. They carved out a home in that yellow house, filling it with the clatter of his tools and the soft whir of her sewing machine. A partnership that grew deeper with each passing season. As they aged together, Matteo became more than a husband. He became Elena's irreplaceable ally, especially when the shadows of old age lengthened. The world beyond their walls continued to shift. Old colleagues retired, neighbors moved, even their siblings grew frail or passed, but Matteo remained, a fixed star in her sky. Their love wasn't the fiery passion of youth, but a slow-burning ember, glowing through small, meaningful acts that spoke louder than words. When Elena's eyesight began to falter at 60, Matteo carved her a magnifying glass from cedar, sanding it smooth so she could keep sewing. When his back stiffened from years of labor, she stitched him a cushion filled with lavender, easing his rest. They'd sit on their porch at dusk, watching the sea turn gold, their hands clasped in a silence that held decades of shared life. It wasn't grand, but it was profound. A love built on patience, sacrifice, and the unspoken promise to face whatever came, together. One winter, when they were both nearing 70, that promise was tested. Matteo fell ill, a cough that deepened into something graver, chaining him to their bed as the cold tightened its grip. The doctor's visits drained their savings, and neighbors offered sympathy but little help. Elena could have crumbled, her hands shook as she brewed his tea, her nights restless with worry, but she didn't. She became his nurse, his cook, his storyteller, sitting by his side with a strength she'd honed over years of standing alone. She'd recount their early days, how he'd once carved her name into a workbench, how they danced barefoot at their wedding, her voice steady even as tears pricked her eyes. Matteo, frail but lucid, would squeeze her hand and whisper, "You're my anchor, Elena." Slowly, spring arrived, and he recovered, his cough fading with the thaw, but the ordeal left them changed. They knew now what they'd always sensed: in old age, when others slipped away, they were each other's greatest refuge. A partnership that didn't just endure but thrived through the quiet heroism of care. Matteo's presence wasn't just emotional, it was practical, tangible, a lifeline through the mundane struggles of aging. When Elena twisted her ankle at 72, he built her a cane from driftwood, its handle curved to fit her palm. When the roof leaked during a storm, he climbed up despite his creaking joints, patching it while she steadied the ladder below. They faced the indignities of old age together, her hearing dulled, his steps slowed, turning each challenge into a shared task, a proof of their alliance. Their days became a dance of mutual support, lightened by his dry humor and her gentle teasing, a rhythm that made even the heaviest moments bearable. Elena often thought of him as the wind lifting her through life's storms, the light piercing its shadows, and as they sat together, watching the waves, she knew he was the reason she could still find joy, no matter what lay ahead. But their life wasn't just the two of them. They'd had children, 2 daughters named Sophia and Clara, born 2 years apart in the bloom of their early marriage. Sophia arrived with a wail that shook the house, her dark eyes wide with curiosity, while Clara followed, quieter, her tiny hands grasping at the world with a fierce determination. Raising them filled Elena and Mateo's days with a joy so bright it seemed to outshine the sun itself. They'd watch Sophia chase crabs along the shore, her laughter ringing like bells, and Clara build towers of stones, her focus unbroken even as the tide crept in. Those early years were a whirlwind of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and sticky fingers clutching homemade dolls Elena sewed from scraps. The girls grew into women under their roof, Sophia bold and restless, dreaming of adventure beyond the sea. Clara steady and thoughtful, sketching plans for a life rooted in the city. Elena and Mateo poured themselves into their daughters, sacrificing sleep for late-night talks, saving coins for their schooling, their pride swelling as Sophia learned to write poetry and Clara mastered numbers with a merchant's precision. Yet, as the girls crossed into adulthood, Elena began to see that children, for all their brilliance, couldn't be her everything. Sophia, at 22, announced she was leaving for a teaching post in a mountain village, her eyes alight with a hunger for the world Elena couldn't quench. Clara, a year later, took a job in a bustling port town, her letters soon filled with tales of ships and trade, her visits rare as her life took hold. At first, Elena felt the sting of their absence like a wound, her mornings quieter without Sophia's chatter, her evenings empty without Clara's soft humming. She'd sit by the window, waiting for their footsteps, her heart heavy with the thought that she'd given them everything, only to be left behind. Mateo saw her drift into this silence and took her hand one night, saying, "We raised them to fly, not to stay." His words lingered, a truth she wrestled with until it settled. Her daughters were her joy, but they had their own paths, just as she'd once had hers. The lesson deepened when Elena turned 68, and a storm of her own making tested her resolve. She'd fallen ill with a fever that lingered for weeks, her strength sapped, her body a shadow of itself. In her delirium, she'd imagined Sophia and Clara rushing home, abandoning their lives to nurse her, a fantasy born of her old habit of seeing them as her anchors. But when she woke, lucid at last, it was Mateo by her side, his brow furrowed as he spooned her broth, while letters from the girls arrived with love but no promises of return. Sophia wrote of her students, Clara of a new contract, both urging her to heal but rooted in their own worlds. At first, Elena felt a pang of loss, but then she remembered the father from a story she'd heard, a man who'd given all for his children, only to sit alone when they moved away, his pride in their success eclipsed by the emptiness of his dependence. She didn't want that fate, so, as she mended, she vowed to love her daughters without chaining them, to find her own footing again, a resolve that freed them to soar and her to stand. That freedom bore fruit in the years that followed. Sophia and Clara built lives rich with purpose. Sophia married a blacksmith and had a son. Clara rose in her trade and bought a small house by the docks. And though they visited when they could, their time with Elena and Mateo was a gift, not a duty. Elena found new ways to fill her days. She joined a group of women who knitted blankets for the poor, her needles clicking in time with their stories. She tended her garden, coaxing roses from the sandy soil. She even wrote letters to her grandson, tales of the sea that Sophia read aloud. These pursuits weren't just distractions. They were proof that her life held meaning beyond her children, that she could savor their love without needing their constant presence. When they did come home, the reunions were sweet, Sophia's son running into her arms, Clara's quiet smile as she shared a cup of tea. Moments made richer because they stood on a foundation of independence, not obligation. By her late 70s, Alina's life had settled into a rhythm of balance, a harmony woven from the three threads she'd come to trust: herself, Matteo, and her daughters. Self-reliance kept her steady. She still walked to the market each week, her basket swinging despite the ache in her hips, her pride in her strength undimmed. Matteo remained her ally, his presence a comfort as they faced the slow decline of age together. Her hearing faded, his sight dimmed, but they laughed through it, their bond a light against the dark. And her daughters, though far, were a joy she held loosely, their letters and rare visits treasures she cherished without clinging to. This balance wasn't accidental, it was built through years of learning, of letting go and holding on in equal measure, a dance of independence and connection that gave her peace. Emotional intelligence and gratitude became the tools that sustained this harmony. Elena had always been quick to feel anger at a stubborn seam, joy at a child's giggle, but age taught her to temper those emotions, to listen before she spoke, to see the world through Matteo's tired eyes or Sophia's restless heart. When Clara once snapped during a visit, stressed from work, Elena didn't bristle. She sat quietly, letting her daughter vent, then offered a hug that smoothed the tension away. Gratitude, too, grew in her like a second skin. She'd wake to the sound of gulls and thank the day for its simplicity. Kiss Matteo's wrinkled hand and feel lucky for his nearness. Write to her daughters and marvel at their lives, however distant. These weren't just habits, they were lifelines, turning old age from a season of loss into one of fullness, a time when every quiet morning or shared glance became a gift. Alina's 80s brought new trials. Matteo's health faltered again, his steps unsteady, and her own body grew frail, her hands trembling as she threaded her needle. But the foundation she'd built held firm. One autumn, when a storm battered their coast, flooding the streets and trapping them indoors, they sat by the fire, Matteo whittling a tiny boat while she mended a shawl, their silence warm with years of knowing. The girls couldn't come. Sophia was nursing her own sick child, Clara stranded by blocked roads, but Elena didn't despair. She'd learned to stand alone when needed, to lean on Matteo when he was there, and to love her daughters without demanding they fill her world. When the storm passed, a neighbor brought fish stew, a small kindness she accepted with thanks, not entitlement, her gratitude deepening the moment's sweetness. Reflecting on her life, Elena saw that old age wasn't the end she'd once feared. It was a beginning, a chance to live richly, independently, and fully present in each day. She'd lost much: friends to time, family to distance, youth to memory. But she'd gained more: a self she could trust, a partner she could lean on, and children she could love without binding. At 85, sitting on her porch with Matteo, the sea stretching endless before them, she felt a peace that wasn't fragile but forged, a happiness that didn't hinge on others but glowed within her. Her grandson's latest letter lay open beside her, Sophia's handwriting promising a visit soon, and Elena smiled, knowing it would come when it could, not when she willed it. Matteo reached for her hand, his grip weak but warm, and she squeezed back, their silence a language of its own. The village had changed. New faces filled the streets, old ones faded into stories, but Elena remained, a figure of quiet strength, her yellow house a beacon of resilience. Neighbors spoke of her in hushed tones, the woman who'd carried water in a drought, who'd nursed her husband through illness, who'd raised daughters who flew far yet never forgot her. She wasn't perfect. There were days when loneliness crept in, when her body betrayed her, when she missed the clamor of her youth. But she'd learned to face those shadows with the tools she'd honed, a belief in herself, a love for Matteo, and a joy in her children that didn't demand their chains. This was the truth she'd distilled from decades of living. In old age, the three friends you can truly trust are yourself, your life partner, and your children, but only if you hold them in balance. Leaning hardest on the one who never leaves, you. One crisp morning, as winter painted the coast in grays, Elena woke to find Matteo still beside her, his breathing shallow but steady, a reminder of their shared fragility. She rose, her joints protesting, and brewed tea, the ritual a small defiance against time's weight. As she sipped it, watching the waves through her window, she thought of the years behind her, the village of her childhood, the city of her middle years, the home she'd built with Matteo, and the years ahead, fewer now, but hers to shape. Sophia had written of bringing her son for the holidays, Clara of sending a crate of oranges from the port, and Elena felt a swell of love for them, tempered by the knowledge that their lives were their own. She didn't need them to fill her days. She had her garden, her knitting, her memories, and Matteo's crooked smile to keep her company. That afternoon, a young girl from down the lane knocked, her arms full of wildflowers she'd picked as thanks for a blanket Elena had given her mother. Elena invited her in, sharing tea and a story of the river woman who'd carried water to stay strong, the girl's eyes wide with wonder. As she left, skipping down the path, Elena felt a spark of purpose. She wasn't just living for herself now, but for those who'd come after, a legacy of resilience she'd pass on, not through demands, but through example. The flowers sat bright on her table, a splash of color against the gray, and she touched their petals, grateful for the day, for the life she'd woven from threads of loss and triumph. As night fell, Matteo stirred, his voice raspy as he called her name. She joined him by the fire, their chairs close, and they talked of nothing and everything, the weather, the girls, the boat he'd never finish carving. His hand found hers, and she held it tight, knowing these moments were finite but feeling no fear, only peace. Old age, she thought, wasn't a fading but a gathering, a time to hold what mattered close and let the rest drift away. Herself, Matteo, her daughters, they were her truest allies, not because they never faltered, but because she'd learned to trust them in their imperfection, to balance their presence with her own. The years stretched on, each slower, each softer, until Elena reached 90, her body a map of time, her spirit undimmed. Matteo passed one quiet spring, his hand in hers as the sun rose, a loss that carved a hollow she didn't try to fill. She buried him by the sea, under a stone he'd chosen years before, and stood there alone, the wind her only companion, yet she didn't break. She'd built a self strong enough to carry on, a life rich enough to endure. Sophia and Clara came, their tears mingling with hers, but they didn't stay. They had their worlds, and she had hers, a balance they all understood. The yellow house grew quieter, but Elena filled it with her own rhythm, knitting, gardening, writing letters she'd send when the mood struck, her days a testament to the independence she'd fought for. At 92, on a morning sharp with frost, Elena sat on her porch, a blanket around her shoulders, the sea a mirror of silver before her. A letter from Sophia lay in her lap, news of her grandson's first poem, a thread of her own legacy looping forward. She smiled, her eyes tracing the horizon, and felt the weight of her life settle, not heavy, but full. She'd lost much, friends to time, Matteo to eternity, her daughters to distance, but she'd gained more, a self she could trust. A love she'd held dear, a joy she'd set free. Old age hadn't taken her, it had revealed her, stripping away the noise to show the three friends who'd carried her through, herself, Matteo, her children, not as anchors to cling to, but as lights to guide her home. And as the sun climbed higher, warming her face, Elena knew she'd lived well, not because she'd kept everyone close, but because she'd learned to stand alone, to love deeply, and to let go with grace.
Please like, share, subscribe to the channel and comment with your email so we can send you a great ebook for seniors. Thank you for watching the video on Senior Vitality TV channel.